Greetings and welcome to Sacred Love, at the crossroads of sexuality and spirituality, a panel discussion of sexual orientation and gender in Mesopotamia. Mesopotamia was a cosmopolitan crossroads, a fertile crescent lying between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, home to a bustling advanced civilization. Inanna, as the goddess of sacred sexuality, brought her power and magic, or May, to social mores and religious practices. Our panelists will share their views on issues important to the LGBTx community with the hopes of building more diverse and inclusive community understanding. I added a few letters in there.
And you could probably say LGBTQ+.
Okay.
If that's easier to say.
Gotcha.
In Mesopotamian society, priests and priestesses were equals to the king in power and honor. They were mediators between the gods and the people. Ordinary Mesopotamians looked to the priesthood to gain the favor of the gods, especially the patron god or goddess of their city. Mesopotamian priests and priestesses had many duties and responsibilities, and in exchange, they received respect, honor, and creature comforts. In the worship of the Sumerian deity Inanna, identified with the Akkadian Ishtar, goddess of love and war, sacred sexuality and practices were incorporated and normalized. We look to Mesopotamia as a crossroads of civilization to find worship and celebration in our modern struggle to normalize what mainstream culture calls alternative lifestyles. Today, our panel will share some of their thoughts and stories about our modern day efforts to define a lifestyle and worship practice that many Sumerians took for granted.
First, we'd like to have our panelists introduce themselves. I'll start. My name is Amara Willey. I'm Chief Sangha and Bottle Washer at this festival. A Sangha is a Sumerian priest administrator who supervises all of the temple's businesses. I've been to Ishtar Fest from before it was a festival, and we were having Shapatu of Ishtar parties in my basement and cross-dressing relay races in my backyard, earning me the title of Den Mother of Iniquity. The first official Shapatu of Ishtar was held in June of 2003, 3 months after my son was born, because I'm slightly crazy and an overachiever. Hands of Change was founded 23 years ago by 4 women, including me, who identified variously as lesbian, bisexual, and heterosexual. Hawk, as we call it, has always had a commitment to being a safe haven for people of all identities. Personally, I'm dedicated to a love goddess, although not specifically to Inanna. I groove with the love deity archetype. Throughout my adult life, I've seen myself as a priestess, and my interest in sacred sexuality has been an exploration of that priestess role as a temple dancer, in ritual, and through leadership roles in the bisexual and polyamory communities before my son was born.
My name is Enheduinanna, and I am a priestess of Inanna, dedicated now 11 years. I've been attending Ishtar Fest since 2016, and have had the honor of offering ritual during the festival since 2017. I am a member of Hands of Change, Ishtar Fest being what initially drew me to this fabulous group of humans. I am also a healthcare advocate for equal rights for women and other underprivileged and marginalized members of society. As a priestess of Inanna, I have a huge interest in sacred sexuality for this panel, and I'm really excited that we're able to bring this together this year. Sex and sexuality is a major aspect of Inanna Ishtar. It speaks to loving not just one another, but self-love and freedom to be who you are, love who you are, and feeling really good about it. She's a come-as-you-are goddess. Yes, the pun is intended. But quite seriously, her temples could be looked upon as epicenters of inclusion in their time of early paganism. I believe there is more interest from contemporary witches and pagans for this goddess by any of her many names, but I'm really interested to hear how far the panelists think we've come in society since then, as it relates to equality and acceptance of gender and sexual orientation.
Hi, my name is Renee, and in sacred space, I go by my spiritual name, Keshavani, and some people also know me as Squirrel. I've been to Ishtar Fest several times in the past, and led an experiential workshop on gender expression in 2016. The ARE, or the Association for Research and Enlightenment, which is the Edgar Cayce Foundation, was a major influence in my household growing up. So meditation and dream study and reincarnation were familiar concepts when I was young. So I self-initiated as a pagan in 1993 and was a member of Hands of Change from 1998 to 2007. I've been a member of a small group of eclectic pagans called Laughing Spirit, and I take part in a community that's dedicated specifically to the merging of sexuality and spirituality called the Body Sacred. I'm also a longtime practitioner of Zen Buddhist meditation and kirtan chant from the Hindu tradition. And for many years, I've been aware that for myself, there's a link between physicality and spirituality. I feel most at peace and one with all when I'm doing things like exercising and dancing and doing yoga and making love. So as a queer person of non-binary fluid gender, the way I experience sexuality is expansive, and it feels like an avenue to the way many of us seek deeper and universal knowledge and connection. So I'm interested in sharing my thoughts about that and hearing about the connections between spirituality and sexuality for others, and ways that we may be part of a long continuum across cultures and ages.
And I'm Eldritch, and I use the pronouns of he, him. You can also see me in any number of outfits and costumery, depending on the events and whatever's happening with me spiritually, whatever's happening within the community. I like to do my part to stir communities up and to stir energy up and bring energy down as needed in a group setting. I'm a Stone Circle Wicca priest and a Circle Sanctuary minister and a Radical Fairy mystic. Radical Fairies are gay people who are now an organization of over 40 years across many different states and around the world, who look at life from a lens of queer spirituality and who understand that the world is better served when we are authentic with ourselves, we're authentic with people around us, and we bring joy and a bent for serious fun in our world. And I think that we often get misunderstood because we have this sense of being frivolous and fun and effervescent, but we take our fun seriously, and we live at the crossroads of sexuality and spirituality. It's there that we understand that people at their core of their self, as in the Sumerian communities, they talk about the term May. When you find your magic, your internal magic, and are authentic and share that with the world. I've been really drawn to understand how we use language, how labels are used, and how words are used to help us, to hurt us, and to heal us. And those are all part of the things I'd like to bring to a discussion today. I love doing workshops and retreats and things like this that help us extend the conversation and understand who we are in service of our gods.
Welcome. Thank you guys so much for forming this conversation with us today.
Enheduinanna, do you want to say something about the May, a little bit more about how you see that?
So in text, it's never been quite distinct what exactly the May is, and the number of May has varied depending on which source you're looking at. Most times you see it as seven sacred May. There's been much thought and philosophy on the sacred May. To me, I would have to agree that the May speaks to what your personal power is, what makes you you, what are your strengths and the lessons that you hold dear, what your morals, if you want to throw that term into it, truly are.
In Sumerian religious practices, Inanna's cults included the Kurgara, and whose dress incorporated mixed gender elements in their public processionals. So we're going to talk a little bit about understanding sex and gender roles in Sumerian and sacred sexual culture. The Gala were priests who were in significant numbers in both the temples and the palaces, the central institutions of Mesopotamian city-states. These were individuals with neither male nor female gender identities. During the festival time, men and women would wear women's clothes on their left side and men's clothes on the right during a procession, while male prostitutes combed their hair in the procession and decorated their necks with colored scarves. The Kurgara priests raised their swords like male genitalia in front of them. So that was a very colorful, perhaps precursor to our modern pride parades. A fragment of a statue held in the archives of the British Museum, dating probably from the late 3rd millennium BCE, bears an inscription translated as this: Slimabudsta, I'll try to get that better, hermaphrodite of Inanna, or more accurately, person, man, woman. Despite all their references to their effeminate character, especially in the Sumerian proverbs, many administrative texts mention Gala priests who had children, wives, and large families. In addition, some Gala priests were women. So up first, let's go to Eldritch.
I really think it's important for us to understand sex and gender role in our current society. I'm intrigued by an understanding and learning about the Kugara and the Gala. It does seem to be a kindred spirit with the people that I know and love across so many communities. But it all starts off with an understanding that somehow as you're growing up, you're like, I'm different. I'm not doing the things that society has told me, at least, and especially in my generation. Kids coming up nowadays have a very different experience, though a lot of families are still very conservative and cling to older gender role models for people. But I think it takes a certain amount of if I may, a certain amount of chutzpah, a certain amount of being authentic with your essential self, to be able to say, I'm not like you. Stop head tripping me. I need to be true to myself. Because when I'm true to myself, and anybody that's queer across any spectrum, and the whole spectrum of straight people and the different ways to be straight and who you are, when you can say, this is who I am authentically, then that allows you to have a certain amount of power and understanding, and it benefits the world around you for you to bring what is your magic to the world. As we formed the group called Stone Circle Wicca USA, early on, there were so many people from LGBT plus identities that when we talked about calling on the god and the goddess, the Lord and the lady, it didn't seem to match our experience. And so because we were LGBT folks of a certain age, we're like, I'm not going to make choices. I'm not going to be the boy in this ritual or the girl in this ritual. Don't make me choose between gender identities in that way. And so we transformed and experimented with something that was true for us. And we're not asking other traditions to change, but we decided to talk about the masks of the divine that are male, the masks of the divine that are female, the masks that are divine that are all gender or a mixture of genders as it shows in society today, and the masks of the divine that are beyond gender, that are not about plumbing, that it's about my spirituality and who I am, and all of that is a secondary, a tertiary thing in our life. And so that understanding really helped us to round out a new practice and break some new ground that was true for us and has been something that many people resonate with. Again, I'm not saying everybody needs to do that, but it is working for us.
I like that. Oh, yeah, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I really like the idea of finding a way to work with take the traditional forms that pagan rituals have come in and look at them and transform them into what works for individual groups or individuals. I think that's really cool. And the thought I was having about this topic is that, you know, in some sense, especially transgender is being treated as if it's like this new big problem in our society. Like someone's going to go in a bathroom and cause a ruckus or cause some kind of problem. And it's the reality is that there have been queer people from the beginning, you know, and it's really great to hear some very early stories and records of that, you know. And I think that incorporating and making a place specifically for queer folks in our rituals is really powerful because we're able to we're able to gain a sense of place in community and in the world where a lot of the sort of external information that we get is saying that we're not good enough or we're not okay somehow. So it's really, I think it's really cool and important to make that space in spirituality.
True. And sometimes people just need to pee. It's not about.
Yeah. That really, it's that simple.
I think one of the great things about the Hands of Change coven has been that sexuality or gender roles has really been looked upon with more emphasis upon it being power and how we all have some amounts of both power within us. And, you know, that's really something that's embraced. You know, when going to Hands of Change rituals, it's not always a biological female who's invoking goddess and you know, same for a male. Everybody's embracing these entities, these powers. And I think that's something that's really, you know, to keep throwing the term around, but really very powerful to experience and to see, like, not only is this a place of less judgment, but I think it opens you up to so much more potential when you embrace all of it.
I was very entertained 2 Imbolcs ago because the 2 people leading our circle were 2 of the men in our group, and like many Wiccan groups, we have more women than men, and the 2 men both decided to work with a goddess, so we had 2 men invoking 2 goddesses. I know in Hands of Change right now, because of the way language is changing in our culture, we're trying to work on and rewrite our charter, our founding documents to, even though we have always had this kind of awareness of gender in our way of worshiping, we're trying to rewrite our documents to take some of the specific gender out of them. So not saying priest, priestess, but saying clergy, or not saying, you know, God or goddess or Lord and Lady, but saying deity and that kind of thing. Sometimes it's hard to find a word that really fits in there because the language hasn't totally caught up to the thinking, I guess.
And the language is something that helps and heals people. Sometimes it hurts people, but we're able to just transform it in our discussions in Stone Circle Wicca. Sometimes we just say the ritualists and don't worry about the gender or the people in service. We also have changed our language, and in our documents we're starting to use the term priest, priestess, and priestex. Some people feel that that's a cool term that makes them identify in and allows them to claim a different label. So we're all experimenting in ways that help us get the extra stuff out of the way so that we can actually serve and commune with our gods.
I might adopt priestess. I really love that, actually. I'd never heard that. It's really cool.
That's delightful that we're learning from this.
And we're still in formation. We talked about the Mass of the Divine being male, female, both, and neither. We had discussions about, well, the word both implies the binary. And the word neither also reinforces the binary. So we're changing to say all genders and beyond gender. And that language will probably change again. But that's how community and society goes. Should we go on to the next section?
So next we want to talk about searching other pantheons for these archetypes of gender expression. In Sumerian, Babylonian, and Assyrian cultures, the pantheon and mythology have examples of many archetypes of gender expression. A Sumerian version of the descent of Inanna myth explains how the god Enki sends two emissaries, a Kragara and a Galator, a man who is not a man and a woman who is not a woman, to rescue Inanna from the underworld where she is trapped. In an Assyrian version of the same story, the Kragara and Galator are replaced by an Asinu. One scholar, Stephanie Daly, coyly translate this as good looks the playboy, but the word Asinu is often translated as feminine man, and there are references in other documents that have been taken to indicate Asinu doing sex work. A similar reference comes from a poem in which Inanna addresses a young maiden using the term lala, which means the vigor of a young man in his prime. Inanna is also believed capable of either gender presentation to bridge heaven and earth, she's the warrior, priestess, lover, as well as gender altering power, or may, the head overturning rite known as sag shubal, to turn a man into woman, woman into man. Inanna had a loyal vassal in her second in command, the messenger goddess Ninshubur, who could change gender depending on which god.
Whoops, we lost your voice.
Oh, are you in? Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Oh, sorry about that. So I'll just go back a line just in case. Inanna had a loyal vassal in her second in command, the messenger goddess Ninshubur, who could change her gender depending on which god she's working for at the time. I'm going to quote Betty DeShong Meader here because I found this particularly powerful in speaking about Inanna. Inanna represents the full expression of the whole range of possibilities for women's identity. Inanna is free to travel throughout the landscape of her sexuality in its many forms as the surging of the life force itself. Why don't we start with you, Robin?
Yeah, I was thinking about, I'm very connected with the Hindu pantheon, and particularly Vishnu and the avatars that come from Vishnu, Krishna in particular for me. And one that I'm really was excited to find out about is Mohini. And Mohini is the only female avatar of Vishnu. And there are a lot of different stories about Mohini. She first appears in the Mahabharata text, and she has a lot of different exploits. And one of them is a story involving, I think she needs to, it's complicated, there's demons and all kinds of things going on. But one of the things that Vishnu does is to become Mohini and seduces Shiva. And Shiva is just so taken by her that he like chases her around the world and eventually catches her and they make love. And it's this really fun story. And in some versions, they have a son named Harihara. And Hari is one of the names of Vishnu, and Hara is one of the names of Shiva. So they create sort of a merging of the two philosophies and the two lines of that, of those deities. And so that's kind of an interesting thing for me. And I really just learned that there is one version of the stories where Mohini and Shiva are making love, and in the middle, Vishnu turns back into like the male form of Vishnu, and they just continue on. So it's really like the only, or one of the only explicit male homosexual expressions in Hindu mythology. So I thought that was really kind of cool. And I want to write some mantra to Mohini, because I feel like I just feel very close to that, the idea of that expression in that pantheon.
Can't wait to hear that.
Yeah.
I was thinking it's really important for us to explore in whatever pantheons that we find ourselves researching, whatever family lines we come from, and looking back to who we have been in, whether we're from a direct family line, or if we have multiple histories and identities and nationalities and ethnicities in our explorations. It's really important to realize how many of our stories, LGBT stories, have been erased from history just because they haven't been carried forward. There's a gathering called a thousand goddess gathering, and realized how many goddesses names have been forgotten over time. So it's important for all of us to look at all of our histories and in all of our pantheons and find those stories. That was unexpected. We had some visitors come to the house with a puppy.
Very nice. So this isn't, I guess, strictly pagan, but one of the things I find really interesting about the Hebrew Old Testament is that the word Elohim is used even starting in Genesis, and it's a plural, and the first part of it is a feminine part, and the second part is a male plural part. So if someone who knew Hebrew were reading the Old Testament, they would be reading female multiple gods when talking about the God form, which I think is kind of an interesting take on the Bible that most people aren't really doing right now.
I think there's a line too, somewhere where Yahweh is quoted as saying, "We will make mankind in our image."
Yeah, you kind of wonder what was actually happening up there somewhere. Maybe a polyamorous relationship in the cosmos.
That could be a whole other panel.
So to move on to our next topic, I think I had something for this one that I didn't say. So the other thing I guess I wanted to share was that when we were putting on our Ishtar Fest play in 2016, the Shapatu of Ishtar, when we were casting the Kurgara and the Galatur, who are the man who is not a man and woman who is not a woman, who rescue Inanna from the Kur, we couldn't find anybody to play those parts who was an adult. No one wanted that part. And we actually had a couple of trans people come to the audition, but they didn't want that part. They wanted a male or a female part, not the male who is not a male, female who is not a female. So the way we solved that is we got two teenagers, to someone who identified as a girl and someone who identified as a boy, to play those two parts. So our next topic is the May of being shame-free. Under the very specific laws of Mesopotamia, some forms of sexuality were accepted and others were not. Laws banned certain negative forms of homosexuality, namely slander, rape, and incest. But sexuality in itself was openly part of the culture. Mesopotamian erotica was quite racy. The Epic of Gilgamesh, Mesopotamia's great literary work, lauded sex as one of the carnal pleasures humans ought to indulge in during our brief tenure on this planet. Siduri, a divine alewife, tells the eponymous king of a rook, let your belly be full, your clothes clean, your body and head washed. Enjoy yourself day and night, dance, sing, and have fun. Look upon the child who holds your hand, and let your wife delight in your lap. This is the destiny of mortals. There's a scholarly debate over what purpose the erotic arts serve, with some contending that they were votive objects for the veneration of Ishtar. Some argue that they were apotropaic, like other terracotta amulets from the era meant to keep away evil spirits. And others say that the clay plaques portrayed prostitution, sexual relations, conducted within a tavern, or sexual intercourse between a husband and a wife with no particular context. Robin, would you like to get started on this one?
Yes, I find it interesting. I think especially when someone's looking back at ancient art, they're really bringing their perspective to it, you know. So some of those different visions are really coming from the person's own background and history, and it's kind of interesting to hear that. I have a question for you first, though. You said homosexual slander, rape, and incest were not okay, but is this heterosexual versions of that okay, or what does that mean? That was very strange
question, and I don't know the answer to that, but do you know from Hammurabi's laws? I definitely haven't read the whole thing.
Yeah.
Ellie,
I don't know. It just struck me as like, wow, that's very weirdly specific.
Yeah.
Usually any law breaking was punished very severely.
Adultery was, and I know that what I had read about that in that was quoted in Hammurabi's laws was that it was like about your neighbor, that if your neighbor slandered you and said you were homosexual, or if there was like your neighbor raped you or you raped your neighbor, that was the language that was being used about your neighbor. I don't know why that was chosen, but because, you know, clearly you're not going to want some stranger from somewhere else raping you either. But
right. It's weird. Anyway, that's kind of beside the point. I was just curious.
I'm glad you brought that up, Robin, because, you know, there are things that we need to look back at. Even in the Ten Commandments, you know, you shouldn't covet your neighbor's ass, and they didn't mean that. But I do think we need to research and understand the cultures in their context, because you're right, that was weirdly specific.
Yeah, interesting. But thinking about shame, you know, one of the things that I have in my life is nudism and naturism. And that is a really, besides just being social and recreational and just enjoyable, it's something that feels really important to me in terms of it being a way to release body shame, because we have so much of that in our culture, you know, and we also have this idea that nudity equals sex equals shame or equals something dirty or something like that, you know. And I've been going to nude beaches for more than half of my life at this point, and you know, places where you can camp and just be present, be in nature, or even just be in other kinds of social situations that are clothing optional. And it just feels incredibly therapeutic, because no matter how I'm feeling about my body that day, like I just kind of let it be, and I can be uncomfortable and release that uncomfortability. And I think other people do the same kind of process. And it's, what else would I say about it? Yeah, it's just a really, for me, it is a positive experience that has that kind of effect. And I hope, you know, it's good to see when people feel really nervous and like, I don't know if I could do that, and feeling really strange about it. And then they go to the beach and they kind of go, oh, okay. It's all kinds of bodies are welcome and of all ages. And you're like, I'm okay. You know, I like that.
Eldritch, do you have any comment on that?
Sure. I grew up in extreme fundamentalist Christianity, and not only in my socializing and upbringing were messages of body shaming just impressed upon me, in the house, outside of the house, in society, but also generally in American society. We're a puritanical society, and we body shame each other so much. And when advertisers show the body and the goals that you're supposed to aspire to, that also adds layers and layers of shame, and it takes stronger and stronger magic, the may of your authenticity, to be able to be who you are as you are, and free yourself from those strictures from society that don't come from within. Pagan religions are often about an intuitive sense of self, and somehow for us to think that our bodies and ourselves are damaged or not equal or not good enough is really damaging to the soul and to the psyche. So there's so much work that needs to be done to help people be who they are as they are, and to find and support that within each other. That's a whole other panel, but it's definitely worth discussing more.
Well, interestingly, I don't know that Sumerian civilization was completely shame-free either, because they had not only doctors and dentists, but they had sex therapists as part of their cadre of medical personnel.
Well, sex therapists could be a good thing. There is a whole cadre of people who are in the sex therapy field who, used to be all talk therapy. You would go and you would talk with people and from there, go and work out your issues with somebody you were dating. But nowadays, and I guess in society, behind closed doors, there were people, I think people would call them temple prostitutes or whatever, the people that are sacred intimates, and people to help you not have to practice about, do I like this or I don't like this, with somebody you're trying to date and be in relationship. Somebody that helps you explore, wow, do I like that? Can I do that? Oh, I can do that. Oh, I like that a lot. I'm going to do that with somebody else. And you don't have to work that out on your boyfriend or girlfriend or boyfriend. You can just find other ways to experiment and explore in healthy and supportive ways. It sounds like there were some things from Sumerian society we could learn from, but of course they're humans too. We all head trip each other one way or another.
And I'll definitely piggyback off that too. I think shame is a human sickness, even as much as we think we're evolved in our modern day and how evolved we are as spiritual pagan beings. I mean, there's still a ton of shame in our own community. You've seen it with one person, we just really loved me naked at your ritual, but everybody else is like, I mean, it still happens. It's still very prevalent.
In the group called the Radical Fairies, one of the things that I found was an openness and an acceptance and a support for each other that really became my salvation, especially coming from this fundamentalist Christian background that I had, that I could be who I was. And then as we were talking among Radical Fairies who are Latinx, and talking about, well, how do you say the word radical fairy? Oh, and also radical fairy is F-A-E-R-I-E. So it's not like Anderson, F-E-R-I, or a fairy tale, F-A-R-Y, but radical fairy, F-A-E-R-I. In Spanish, some people have translated it to be las hadas sin vergüenza, to be the fairies, angels, the fairies without shame, because we're known to be free spirits. We're known to just about say anything, anytime, anywhere, and speak truth to power. And there is a certain magical power that comes from the freedom of expression and saying what's on your mind, and also knowing when to be politic and when to say things discreetly. But I think that that's an important part of not having that shame that holds us back from helping our communities and our societies and our relationships be all that they can be.
A couple of years ago in Hands of Change, one of our male members brought up the idea that when we were on our piece of land, our covenstead, as a coven only thing, that that everyone could be shirt free, could be, you know, top free. And he couldn't get anyone to really get behind that idea. We would agree to it, but none of the women wanted to be top free, or you know, a couple of them were like, yeah, okay, I'd be willing to do that, but it's not really my, you know,
not my thing.
Yeah, it's not my thing. And I thought that was very interesting, because I don't believe it was, you know, I believe his intentions were good, that he just wanted there to be equality, but it wasn't a thing we were ready for yet.
Right. And in an age of consent, in this era of consent culture, it's really important that people do and be within their own limits, and they are the persons who decide what is in their autonomy, what's right for them.
So why don't we move over to polyamory for a little bit. Polyamory may have been accepted as a mode of relationship in ancient Sumeria. One myth describing the sacred marriage of the goddess to her consort suggests that they may have been joined in bed by her bridesmaids. The myth tells us, when you trip along into the lap of Dumuzi, your bridegroom, Inanna, your 7 paranymphs, Nigir Si, Susapinu, lie with you. Men who had the economic means could take 1 or more second wives or concubines. Also, they were free to visit the professional prostitutes of both sexes. Let's see, who wants to start that? Robin, you want to comment on that one first?
Sure, I can say a few things. I feel that I'm just polyamorous by nature. It's something that I've just really sort of recognized, not very long after recognizing my my attraction to more than one gender and all those other things in life. And, you know, it's been a matter of just getting to understand myself more, and then finding community around polyamory as well as I got older. And one of the things that I think is really useful and wonderful about the polyamorous communities is that we can describe, we have a lot of language for the different types of relationships that one can form, and an openness to what those can be, whether it's a V or a triad or a quad or solo polyamorous person, all those kinds of things. There's just more language to talk about those things, and also a real commitment and ability to communicate, which I think is really helpful in terms of being, when you're relating to someone, it's not about possessing them, it's about just being present with that person, you know. So there's a focus on that, especially because we do communicate. If you have a one relationship and you want to be harmonious with someone else you're also connecting with, it's important to be clear and to ask for what you want and to listen. And one of the things that I think is really useful is that those kinds of skills can work in any relationship. So I actually was recently interviewing someone who's writing a book about their what they learned entering into polyamory, and the skills that they learned that apply to any relationship, including monogamous relationships or anyone. I'm trying to think of some things. Compersion is a great concept from polyamory that doesn't have a lot of, it doesn't talked about often outside of that, but it's the feeling of joy and positivity that one gets from seeing your partner, or, you know, experiencing your partner's joy because of another partner that they have. So it's sort of like the inverse of jealousy. And it's a real feeling that some of us have that is, I'm glad there's a word for it because it's not often discussed, you know. And there's a lot that I think poly can offer to the greater community in those ways.
Robin, I'm glad you mentioned being poly by nature. I know that as we've prepared for this panel, we've had some discussions back and forth, but one way of looking at it is that being polyamorous is it's an identity. It's by nature that you are you have an orientation of being polyamorous. I know that in one of my first relationships, we ended up having to break up because he was monogamous by nature. Couldn't imagine me being with anybody else. And I was like, oh, I'm not constructed that way. And so I could do and consent to being the way he wanted me to be for a while. And then he would try to consent to me being my way for a while, but it never really worked. It wasn't really in our nature. And so I think that those are things for us to explore in asking people, are you monogamous and are you polyamorous, and supporting them in understanding that, oh, you don't have to try to force somebody to be something that they're not.
That's very true. And it's also, there's just something that's made me think that people sometimes assume that if you're polyamorous, it means you're out doing everybody every weekend or something like that. Yeah. The same as the assumption that can be about being bisexual. And for me, it's much more about who I am in terms of, like you said, inner makeup, So I'm not dating anybody right now. I'm quite solitary actually, but I'm always polyamorous as the way that I experience love.
Yeah.
And I in our earlier discussions, so I think that for me, polyamory is sort of a fluid identity, because I definitely, before I even had a word for it, would experience, once I started loving somebody, I wanted to love more than one person. Like everybody seems like, and maybe not everybody, but there were, I've had multiple partners from the time I was in high school. And then for the last 7 years, I've been with somebody who's monogamous, and I have not wanted to go outside that relationship because I know it would hurt him. And it hasn't been a need. So for me, it's been kind of a change, I guess.
Mm-hmm. I think it's good to respect that within each other and across communities and across people that you're meeting and relating with, especially in festival culture. It's just knowing and being clear about boundaries and consent and respecting who and how the person wants to relate to other people.
So our next topic is same-gender love. Homosexuality and bisexuality were accepted in Mesopotamia. Pictorial and literary references in ancient Mesopotamia show acceptance of some forms of sexuality, but wariness towards other. Anal intercourse was freely pictured in figurative art in the cities of Uruk, Ashur, Babylon, and Susa from the 3rd millennium BC on, I guess BCE, and images show that it was practiced as part of religious ritual. Both Zimri-Lin, king of Mari, and Hammurabi, king of Babylon, had male lovers, which the queen of Zimri-Lin mentions matter-of-factly in a letter. The Almanac of Incantations contained prayers favoring on an equal basis the love of a man for a woman, of a woman for a man, and of a man for a man. Unfortunately, the woman for a woman seems to have been left out of that. The Summa Alu, a manual used to predict the future, sought to do this in some cases on the basis of sexual acts, 5 of which are homosexual. That different kinds of homoerotic pairing will occur is taken for granted in this manual. What mattered was the role and the status of the partner, especially the passive partner, and the anticipated ramifications in each case. To penetrate a male who was of equal status or a cult prostitute was thought to bring good fortune, but copulation with a royal attendant, a fellow prisoner, a household slave was thought to probably spell trouble. Kings had male lovers along with their wives. Warriors developed romantic attachments, as in the Epic of Gilgamesh, and ordinary men customarily had anal intercourse with male and female cult personnel. Let's go to Eldritch.
Well, that's a perfect topic to jump off to me for. I think it's really important to understand that there's so much more than just a sex act to a person's sexual identity, and that those are really good areas for people to kind of parse out, you know, that, well, if I'm gay, then I must do this act. If you're gay, you must do that act. And it's a lot more complex than that in the real world. There's so many options of things you would do with this person and you wouldn't do with that person, but you might with someone else. And so there's a fluidity there that goes beyond orientation. I think also interculturally and intergenerationally, an understanding of sexuality. I don't know, do kids nowadays in high school have Sadie Hawkins dances? And where the girl asked the boy out, and that was the big scandal in the 60s and 70s, that a woman could actually be the person to ask someone out. You know, there's just different ways of expressing your agency. But about homosexuality in general, I mean, it is so much more natural and prevalent than anybody ever wants to discuss. Bisexuality, so much more in society than people want to discuss, and bi visibility is still a huge issue in society as a whole. And so I think that all of those discussions have to be there in a discussion of understanding people's sexual identities as what also becomes their personal identities. Cross-culturally, some people assume that you're going to use the word gay, and that's not true. There are communities that use the term men who love men. And they only use that word because the word gay has other connotations cross-culturally that they don't want to accept. And so you'll see the terminology even today where it is respectful to talk about men who love men and not use the term gay. So it's language and linguistics and understanding of people's identities are important in society. For all of us to have a kind of sensual literacy and to have vocabulary that helps us have good conversations like the conversations we're having today.
I don't know if that was a real question about the Sadie Hawkins thing, but according to my son, all the dances the women are supposed to ask the men.
Oh.
I don't know if that's true, but that's what.
In this age of consent, maybe things have shifted again.
That's funny. I like that. I was just remembering, Eldridge, you were talking about how prevalent, you know, queer identities are today and throughout time, really, I guess, but especially it's talked about more today, which is a positive thing. And I was just remembering that I believe just this year in 2020, someone came out with another article that said, we really believe that bisexual men actually exist.
Oh, I'm glad they found them finally.
I mean,
take them out of the museum under glass and they can actually be present in society.
Right, because there was an article about 10 years ago, I think in Newsweek, that was called Gay, Straight, or Lying.
Oh.
And they had done some really poor examples for scientific experiment and found that very few men fit into like a bi category or something. And all of us were shaking our heads like, this is ridiculous. And so I guess someone's now done more research. They could just talk to people perhaps, but you know, they have to do it the complicated way.
And in the 70s, there was a really famous study that gave us the language of the Kinsey Six.
Oh, yes.
You know, so, you know, are you really straight? Are you really gay, regardless of gender? And then are you somewhere bi in between? Are you, you know, somewhere on a spectrum? So that language hasn't really carried over in society, but, you know, there are people that, another term that's come up in society, being heteroflexible or being homoflexible, you know, of like, hey, my orientation is my orientation, but with you, I might do that.
Exactly. And this whole conversation just reminds me of the importance of visibility. And I really recognize that not everybody has the privilege to be out.
Yeah.
You know, they could live within a part of their culture or family or work situation where like waving flags and, you know, dressing, going to parades might not be the thing that they can do, you know, but I do feel like if you can find a way to your own honesty with friends or however far that circle can reach, I think it's a really good thing for people to maybe who aren't able to do that, to just see those of us who do speak openly about our sexualities. And you know, I know there were people when I was young that I could see as a role model and get a feeling of like, oh, I could go and live and be who I am, you know, and that was hugely important.
And there's a certain may or magic of that when people get together among, you know, sometimes at potlucks or, you know, when you're in a self-described situation, then you actually see a person open up and be somebody totally different than when they schlep off to work or when they turn around and have a conversation with their great aunt or their grandma. You know, they shift and change. It's great to see people open up and be who they are. I think authenticity as the May, as our magic is a really important discussion that Ishtar Fest brings to the table.
And code switching like that is also an important skill to have, I think, in our world. So,
and how to signify in a conversation, or the old school word like, oh, I dropped a bobby pin there, meaning a drag queen who dropped a bobby pin. You let out the secret, you know. At least nowadays, I don't think we have that much work to do.
Right.
And I think that to some degree depends on where you are in the country.
That's true. And I'm interested in as we were constructing this panel, the discussion of the Sumerian culture being at a crossroads. If they're in a metropolitan, a cosmopolitan area, there must have been so many, you know, trade routes and people and things coming through that things were much more available like it is in the big city. And so I think there's more to explore and discuss there.
Surely, I mean, there's examples over the globe of Sumerian artifacts or similar designs and architecture being found. And there's definitely evidence of trade. So I'm sure there was a lot of other trading going on as well.
You could probably take it out and trade.
Yeah, I'm sure you can. Show me yours. I'll show you.
What do you got?
Next on our list, we have respect for asexuality. While making love was considered a natural activity that should not be demeaned and acted as one pleased, so long as no third party was harmed, there were certain prohibitions, such as banning of sexual activity on certain days, and some women were reserved for the gods. Eldritch, why don't I start with you this time?
New in my vocabulary has been the term asexual, and understanding that there's it puts the A in the LGBTQIA alphabet soup that we have. And it's been important for me to understand that some people look at sexuality as a not thing, whereas other people are like, hey, I'm now free to be this and do this. And other people are like, not my gig, not my bag. And so I think it's important for us to learn from, to seek out people who can talk about asexuality in society, in groups, in our communities. You know, just because it's Beltane doesn't mean that everybody wants to fuck like bunnies. There are people that are like, not my thing.
Yeah, it's interesting for me to think about, and I take it as an exercise in really listening and believing people and hearing what they have to say about that experience, because I'm quite a sexual person. I just don't have any reference point to what it would feel like to just not have that desire, So it's good. I think it's good for me to hear that and learn more and understand. I think I have a similar feeling about, although it's different, but somewhat similar feeling to what it would be like to be straight. Like I don't get it. I just so don't feel that that it's interesting and it's but it's good. It's good to really understand the depths of our diversity.
I remember in the 70s that there was a term that came out in sociology that if people were talking about homosexuality, you couldn't even have the conversation because of the ick factor. And that term, the ick factor, was a bona fide term where people were like, I couldn't do that. They're like, we're not asking you to do that. If I want to do that, that doesn't mean that I'm asking that I want to do that with you. And that doesn't mean that I want you to do something that doesn't work for you. So don't ask me to do that because, I'm not going to do that. And so having that sense of what you will do and what you won't do, I do think that we end up head tripping people and thinking that everything's about sexuality. And sometimes it's not.
So there seems to be the Grand Prix out my window, so I keep muting. But so our next topic is labels, and that seems like a good segue from where we are. Labels that help, hurt, and heal. Sex workers and sacred sex priestesses were protected in ancient Mesopotamia by law and by tradition. In Hammurabi's Code of Laws, the rights and good name of female sacred sexual priestesses were protected. The same legislation that protected married women from slander applied to sexual priestesses and their children. They could inherit property from their fathers, collect income from land worked by their brothers, and dispose of property. In one of the hymns, Ishtar designates herself as a loving harimtu, sitting at the entrance of a tavern, and as a car kid in the context of being one who knows the penis. If Ishtar is able to label herself as a sacred prostitute, that label has to be seen as sacred. Inanna, or Ishtar, was called a hierodule, which is a divine sacred prostitute, and many male prostitutes, homosexual and transvestite, served her. Gala is, the word Gala, which is one of the priests that serve Inanna, is can be also heard as Gal La, which means vulva. So I'm going to go to Robin first.
Yeah, I pay a lot of attention to the language that we use and that is being used specifically in progressive communities, in social and political arenas, and our various spiritual communities too. There's been a lot of change recently and a lot of real sort of attention to the context and the subtext of words. And one of the things that what you were saying just reminded me of is the term sex worker and how that really is the term that's in use right now. Excuse me. Because it really does serve to show respect to sex work as valid work. And some of the older terms are less in favor, like, calling some, even like the word prostitute is, maybe it's redeemed by using it in the term of sacred prostitution, but it's a little bit, has a connotation to it that is less savory, than sex worker or hooker or just a hoe, whatever, although some people might like to be called a hoe, but that's a different, more playful context. But, I'm really appreciative of this amazing explosion of terms that we have to describe sexualities and gender right now. In fact, I've always felt what we now call gender fluid or non-binary. And it was so amazing to find words that describe that. A lot of people talk about not having heard the word bisexual or certain words for sexuality when they were young. And that came to me very early, like I had that term, but for gender, I didn't have a word. I would say, well, gender malleable, I think is the term I came up for myself. But when I heard other people using those terms, I was like, wow, that's amazing, and they're so many now to describe different sexualities and gray areas of all of those things and the gradations. One thing I feel though is that the downside that I've noticed is that there's sometimes a policing of the use of these terms. Like all these terms are created and they're wonderful, and then either the meanings shift or people have a certain opinion about certain words, and then you're on the outs if you use that word because now the new word is this. And it can be, it can cause a lot of friction. In fact, for me, one of the ways that was painful was that I came across the word androgyne, which is a term for someone who really embodies masculine and feminine and inner energies or appearance or both, you know, and it felt like it fit so much. And I was like, this is great. And I found, I was just looking on the internet and I found a website that had a whole list of words for various genders. And I was reading, this is great. And then it said, and if you come here using the word androgyne, don't even talk to us, you're gonna get kicked out off the page. And I was like, okay. It was really upsetting because I guess in this particular context, it was like, they were not trying to use words that even acknowledged that a binary existed in anyone's mind or something. And for me, like that, it felt still relevant to address that and feel that and talk about it within myself in a way. So it was really pretty demoralizing to think I'd found something amazing and then find that I'm already antiquated or just wrong or something in these people's eyes. So I just hope that our communities, as we use labels, you know, use them as a starting point for a conversation, you know. So if someone says, well, I call myself this, then say, hey, well, what does that mean for you? As opposed to like assuming it's something offensive. So that's my hope for how we can move in this experience.
You know, I feel like I've been kind of out of the community since my son was born, just because I don't have that much time and energy to devote. So I feel like I've missed 17 years of label changing and the understanding of what people are doing and the evolution of things. And now I kind of, although I still feel like I have, you know, a gender identity that isn't necessarily normative, I don't know that I really fit anymore in that community either, because I don't even, I've missed so much time. I feel like I would walk into something where I used a word that I would use 20 years ago and people would say, oh, oh my God, that's such a terrible word to use. So I guess for me, that's like a little bit of shame and a little bit of label at the same time.
Yeah, I don't have a lot of energy for that. I mean, I understand where it comes from, but I get very frustrated with that. You probably could get canceled for using the word transvestite, so just so you know. But it's fine. But in context, what you said, I was not offended, and I don't think anyone here would be. But it's an interesting artifact of the growth of this culture, I think.
I have a funny story to tell about that. When I was a young queerling, and that's not a word that I had then, but it's a word that I use now, the young queerlings coming up. When I was at home and some late night, I came across Rocky Horror Picture Show, and it was like, what is that? And that song, Sweet Transvestite from Transylvania. And to find out later on that that movie, 25, 30 years later, got a cultural award for being important to the culture of America. And I know that it was incredibly important for me when I heard a word that made me think, or I didn't know there was a term for that. I think early on, all of us kind of feel that way when we choose labels and we use them in conversation. I mean, labels do help, they hurt, and they heal. And all of those things are important, and given the context. I think it's really interesting to watch the medical community describe the transgender community or medical information, watching legislatures try to codify into law, the transgender bathroom bills and things like that. And all of a sudden, everybody has to go, wait a minute, is that in the Merriam-Webster dictionary? Is it there yet? You know, can we use that word? Is it in our vocabulary? And so I love the fluidity of language. And it does mark us. I mean, you can tell by the word that a person uses what generation they're probably from, and those things are just a normal part of life. But the in between those three H words is discourse and respect, and going, oh, that word you used, what did you mean by that? And always assuming the positive, and asking people to, finding ways to have conversations that keep things open before we shut down or call out. I've seen call out culture really hurt people and hurt people badly. I'm not saying that you shouldn't speak truth, but call in culture is very important, where you go, hey, could we talk about that? Or I don't have the energy to talk about it, but I do think you should have some conversations with other people rather than just throwing them out, because they've used a label or used a label wrongly. I think we're growing as communities, and that we'll find ways to do that. And that is important as we weave together our communities, coming together on this panel, watching society shift and change, and learning to use words that you never thought a newscaster would say. All of a sudden, society changes, and that's how we go from revolution to evolution, and it just becomes a normal thing in life.
And to jump in there, Eldritch, you mentioned the medical community. At least where I work, we have annual trainings on labels and orientations and just how to keep providing respect and other resources that might be out there for a patient that you might have. And at least in my personal experience, if we have a biological male patient, but he identifies as a woman, it spreads like wildfire. Anybody at that door, okay, his name is Roy, but he goes by Jennifer, so you better say she's Jennifer. Like, everybody does kind of rally and try to support.
Out of
Everybody's
respect.
kind of worried, like, oh my God, I don't want to slip and then offend this person. But I have at least noticed a lot of support, at least where I am.
Yeah, society is changing, and the Q word. I prefer to say I'm part of the queer community than the LGBTQIASS community. It's a great shorthand, and it's powerful to reclaim words. But in different generations, that word was the source of such hurt and derision and pain. So you have to respect that too. But kids these days, and some crazy ass adults these days are going to use words you might not understand or want to rally behind, but we have to respect people and move with them and understand who we are and how we describe ourselves. That's magical. That's the May of community, where we can understand and support each other.
So this has been such a great conversation. I really enjoyed speaking to all of you, and I learned a lot, and I really want to thank Robin and Eldritch for being part of this panel today, and for my co-sister in Sumerian scholarship, Enheduinanna, for all of her research. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This has been fantastic.
Thank you. It's been great.
You all. Thank you, Amara, for supporting this idea. Thank you, Robin and Eldritch, for being here and sharing so much and being vulnerable and passionate and powerful. And I think we all need to just thank the universe, by whatever name you call it, for the wonderful experience of love, however that is, and for all those fantastic little nerve endings, however we use that.